The first time I saw him, he was bent over a row of rose bushes, hands deep in the dirt, sunlight catching on the silver in his hair. Just another Tuesday on Cedar Lane, or so it looked. His name was Harold Ellis, 74 years old Navy man, the kind of neighbor who waved at kids riding bikes and fixed your mower without asking for a dime. He'd been out there every Tuesday for 15 years tending those roses like they were family. And yet one afternoon, all it took was a phone call from across the street to turn that quiet garden into a war zone. It started with the sound of a patrol car rolling up engine-low tires crunching against the curb. Officer Grant Wilson stepped out, sunglasses on hand, already resting on his baton. You know the type: uniform, crisp hair, cut high and tight, confidence rolling off him like heat off asphalt. He looked at Harold the way some folks look at stray dogs, suspicious, impatient, already convinced of a story he hadn't heard. "Sir," he barked, "drop those tools and step away from the flowers." He said it like the pruning shears were a gun, like a 74-year-old man was public enemy number one. Harold straightened slowly, wiped his hands on his old windbreaker, and turned around with the kind of dignity that only comes from a lifetime of swallowing moments like this. "These are my roses," he said softly, voice steady as a prayer. "This is my yard." He gestured toward the little blue house behind him, windows catching the sun like eyes watching. He moved deliberately like he was on stage, every motion calculated not to spook the man with the badge. Years of training had taught him to catalog a threat without making it obvious: the weight of the officer's boots, the shift of his belt, the set of his jaw. But Wilson wasn't listening. He saw an old black man with tools in a white neighborhood and filled in the blanks himself. "Let's see some ID," he snapped, stepping closer, knuckles whitening on the baton. "Keep your hands where I can see 'em." Harold nodded, moved slow as Honey pulled out his worn leather wallet and handed over his driver's license and a tattered military ID most civilians wouldn't recognize. Wilson snatched it like evidence, eyes darting over the details, muttering, "Could be fake." The license matched the mailbox 10 feet away, but facts weren't the point, dominance was. "I've lived here for 18 years, Harold said, still calm, still trying to build a bridge out of words. "Every Tuesday I tend my garden." "Maybe your caller misunderstood." His voice had that quiet steel of a man used to leading young soldiers through their first firefight. But instead of softening, Wilson bristled. To him, composure looked like defiance, articulation, like arrogance. "Turn around, hands on the fence," he ordered, his voice rising. "Spread your legs." From her kitchen window across the street, Mrs. Drake froze with her coffee halfway to her lips. She'd been the one who called, thinking Harold seemed confused, maybe dizzy. She'd wanted to help. Now she was watching a scene she didn't recognize, her well-meaning concern twisted into something dangerous. Harold moved to the fence he'd built with his own hands 3 summers ago. The wood felt cold under his palms. His knees ached as he spread his legs a little wider, an old man trying to avoid becoming a headline. "Officer, I don't understand why this is necessary," he said, voice still, even but tight with pain. "I've given you everything you asked for." Wilson's pat-down was rough, his hands treating Harold's body like a crime scene, pulling out a small bag of rose fertilizer and holding it up like contraband. "What's this?" he demanded. "Plant food." Harold replied, his tone flat. "Receipts in my wallet if you'd like." Neighbors started gathering, a woman shading her eyes at the door, a man stepping out of his garage with tools still in his hands. Phones appeared, cameras rolled. You could feel the shift in the air, like the temperature dropping before a storm. And then it happened. Wilson shoved Harold hard against the fence, his baton sliding free with a hiss. "You think you're better than me," he barked, "because you claim some military service you don't have to show respect." The baton rose. Time slowed. Harold's body knew exactly how to end it. 3 decades of elite training burned into his muscles, reflexes faster than thought. He could have dropped Wilson before the younger man drew his next breath, but he didn't. He took the first blow on his shoulder muscle, tensing to absorb it, jaw tightening, but no sound escaping. He took the second on his ribs, shifting just enough to avoid a fracture, appearing clumsy, but actually guiding the strike. He took the third across his back, a grunt, slipping from his lips despite his discipline. Blood from rose thorns mixed with sweat as he stumbled into the bushes he'd nurtured for years. Mrs. Drake screamed from her porch. "Stop it! He's not fighting you!" The words cut the suburban silence, but Wilson's eyes were glassy with adrenaline. "Stay back!" he shouted at the crowd. "This is police business." He raised the baton again, voice cracking power slipping through his fingers. That's when another voice entered, low and steady, like a drumbeat. "Officer, step away from him now." A man in plain clothes walked up the street with the kind of confidence you don't fake. His name was Commander Luis Ortega, though nobody there knew it yet. He'd been driving by, saw the commotion, and stopped. "I said, step away!" Ortega repeated his tone, leaving no space for argument. Wilson turned, still clutching the baton, trying to sound official. "This is a police matter, sir. Move along." But Ortega's eyes were cold steel. An unarmed elderly man beaten in his own yard. That's not police work. That's assault with a deadly weapon. Phones kept rolling. Barbara Drake's voice cracked as she confessed from across the street. He wasn't threatening anyone. "I just called because I thought he needed help." The lie Wilson had been constructing started to crumble in real time. The baton in his hand felt suddenly like evidence, not authority. Sirens echoed from a distance, growing louder. Within minutes, Harold was in an ambulance, paramedics murmuring to each other as they documented bruises, scratches, defensive wounds. His records at the Veterans Hospital triggered security protocols nobody in that ER had ever seen. Level 4 clearance. Restricted files. Suddenly, phone calls were being made from the Pentagon, names whispered like passwords. In less than an hour, men and women in uniform who owed their lives to Harold Ellis were texting, calling, booking flights. You see, Harold wasn't just another retiree. He was the chief instructor behind a program so elite most people think it's a myth. The man who'd built warriors, refined them, sent them into places nobody admits exist. The man who had taught them when to strike, when to wait, when to choose restraint over retaliation. And here he was, bloodied in his own garden for the crime of tending roses while black. By the next morning, the small town of Fairview felt different. Rental cars with military plates outside the Holiday Inn. Men and women in civilian clothes but carrying themselves like predators in slow motion. The FBI had already taken Officer Wilson's baton as evidence, and a federal agent named Michelle Vega was quietly dismantling his report line by line. "Officer Wilson," she said in the interview room, her voice calm as a winter lake, "help me understand how a 74-year-old man with pruning shears was threatening to you." Every answer he gave dug the hole deeper. Every witness statement contradicted him. Every video clip exposed another lie. Meanwhile, Harold lay in his hospital bed, shoulder-wrapped ribs, taped eyes clear. He'd survived worse, that's what his body language said, but you could see the sadness in his hands as he flexed his fingers, remembering the rose thorns, the baton strikes the years of building a sanctuary only to have it invaded. He was grateful for the help, but wary of the attention. He'd built his retirement on anonymity, and now the world was knocking on his door. Outside in the waiting area, men and women he'd trained sat quietly, their presence radiating a different kind of power. They weren't there for revenge. They were there to protect the man who'd taught them about restraint, about the long game. Commander Ortega coordinated with Agent Vega, making sure every step stayed inside the lines of the law while still carrying the weight of an institution far bigger than a single police department. And back on Cedar Lane, the rose bushes stood tall, petals opening like nothing had happened. But the fence still bore the scuff marks where Harold had been shoved, and the neighbors who'd watched couldn't unsee it. They whispered to each other about what they'd learned, about assumptions, about power, about how easily a wellness check can become a battlefield when prejudice writes the script. In the weeks that followed, debates raged online. Was Officer Wilson a bad apple or a symptom of something deeper? How many Heralds never get cameras pointed at them in time? How many commanders never happen to drive by? And what does it say about us, that a man who spent his life protecting his country couldn't find safety in his own front yard? I'll leave you with this picture. A 74-year-old veteran stands in his garden, roses blooming behind him, a lifetime of discipline in his eyes. A police officer stands across from him, baton heavy in his hand, prejudice heavier in his heart. And a neighborhood watches, phones raised, trying to decide what they're seeing. It's a moment balanced on a knife edge, restraint versus rage, dignity versus domination. And it's a moment we're all responsible for. If this story hit you the way it hit me, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you've witnessed, what you think is right or wrong, where you've seen prejudice play out. Do you believe dignity still has power against unchecked authority? Or do you think restraint just invites more violence? Let's talk about it right here because silence is how these stories get buried, and we're not burying this one.